We're here today because we care deeply about the environment. Especially during this time in history, we want to know how we can most effectively help at the national, state, and local level. The panelists here tonight will describe the risk they see to the environment, what they are doing, and how we can help. And after the panelists share their thoughts, we'd like to hear from you. Our first panelist is Nathaniel Stinnett. Nathaniel is the founder and executive director of the Environmental Voter Project, a nonpartisan nonprofit that uses big data analytics and behavioral science to identify non-voting environmentalists and then get them to vote. Recently dubbed the voting guru by Grist magazine, Stinnett was named one of the country's 50 environmental visionaries in 2016. He has held a variety of senior leadership and campaign manager positions on U.S. Senate, congressional, statewide, and mayoral campaigns. Formerly an attorney at the international law firm of DLA Piper LLP, he is widely recognized for this work as a land use, environmental, and real estate attorney. Please welcome Nathaniel Stinnett.
I'm going to talk about the things that were just mentioned. And I'm going to do it in the context of talking about our nonprofit, the Environmental Voter Project. So what I'll do is, I'll tell you a little bit of the story about why we founded this nonprofit, and then I'll get into the problem we're trying to address, which is that, believe it or not, environmentalists aren't voting. 2, how we're solving that. And then 3, we're going to give you some very clear action items that you can take to have an extraordinary impact, not just on environmental politics, but on environmental policy. So we've got some great policy people over here who are going to follow me. I am not going to talk about policy, I'm going to talk about politics, but as I'm sure we all know, they are connected. So I'll start with the Environmental Voter Project. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit. We do not endorse candidates. We do not lobby for particular issues. We do not even try to convince people to care more about the environment. All we do is find environmentalists who don't vote and use a lot of cutting-edge techniques to turn them into more consistent voters. And this is why we do it. I come from a background running campaigns. I've been a campaign manager or a senior strategist on campaigns big and small for over a decade. And something always made me want to put my head through a wall. And it's something that I bet a lot of you are familiar with, if not painfully familiar with. And that is this. When you poll likely voters in any election, whether it's for President of the United States or state rep here in Acton or city council in Boise, Idaho, when you poll those voters and ask them to prioritize the issues they care about most, climate change and other environmental issues are almost always at the bottom or close to it. And believe me, that affects how policy is made. Because if voters don't prioritize a particular set of issues, how on earth can we expect policymakers to prioritize those issues? I saw it on all the campaigns that I was involved with. I worked with a lot of great environmentalists. But it is malpractice to run a campaign talking about issues that voters don't care about. And even when you elect great environmental champions, it's really hard to expect them to spend their political capital on a bunch of issues that voters don't prioritize. I'll give you an example. I should point this that way. There we go. Leading up to this recent presidential election, we laid down a poll of likely voters in the presidential election. We asked them to list their #1 most important political priority and their #2 most important political priority. There we go. Some of the writing's small, this is a big space, but way down at the bottom at 4% is climate change and the environment. Only 2% listed it as their #1 priority and another 2% as their #2 priority. I bet a lot of you, like me, were really frustrated that climate change got no time in the presidential debates or the vice presidential debates. Want to know why? Voters aren't prioritizing these issues. They're just not. And with the limited amount of time and money that any campaign has, and don't get me wrong, money absolutely distorts the political process. But people running for office have to get 50% plus one of the vote on a Tuesday in November, and they usually only have 6 or 7 months to do it. And the amount of money they have to spend is quite literally limited by law. And they're competing with Nike and Coca-Cola and Apple to get inside your head and tell you things about them. And when they have all those struggles with limited time and limited money, you think they're going to spend time talking about an issue that is that far down the list of priority for voters? No way. Furthermore, campaigns only target likely voters. When you live in that resource-poor environment, you can't spend all your time and money talking to non-voters. And let me tell you something. If there's one thing you take away tonight, let it be this. Whether you vote or not is public record. You got that? Who you vote for is secret. But whether you vote or not is public information. And you want to know the first thing that any campaign does? They decide who are we going to talk to and who are we not going to talk to. And the way they do that is by going to the public voter records and seeing, oh, the people on this side of the room are likely to vote in my election, and the people over here aren't going to vote. I'm going to talk to these people. Because it would be suicide to spend your precious time and money talking to folks who have proven over and over again that they don't vote in the election you care about. So not only do campaigns only target likely voters, but that means politicians only poll them, right? If only you guys are going to vote, why am I going to bother polling all of you to figure out what you care about? I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to you. And this is bad news for the environment, because this isn't some secret poll that I showed that nobody knows about. It's just like every other poll out there. Every time politicians poll voters to figure out the issues they care most about, the stuff that we care about is not popping anywhere close to the top, not even the middle. But before you get too discouraged, there's some really good news. After getting off a very big campaign, I was taking a break before heading back to the law firm that I kind of worked at in between campaigns. And I was looking over some polling data for a friend of mine who's a national pollster. And I realized something that totally blew my mind. And I brought it around to the heads of all the big national environmental organizations, Sierra Club, NextGen, League of Conservation Voters, NRDC, EDF, and they looked at it and they couldn't believe it either. And that was this. The reason so few voters prioritize environmental issues is not because too few Americans prioritize environmental issues. I'll say that again because it's important. The reason so few voters prioritize these issues is not because too few Americans prioritize them. In fact, there are tens of millions of Americans who so deeply care about climate change and the environment that they list it as one of their top 2 priorities. The problem is that they're awful voters. They are awful voters. We were looking at polling data and we realized, wow, you know, when you poll all registered voters, or if you poll all eligible voters, or if you just poll all American adults, well, it isn't like climate change is the #1 priority, but it's a heck of a lot higher up. And the more and more we dug into this, the more we realized, wow, we might not have a persuasion problem as much as we have a turnout problem. In fact, and I'll get into very briefly, because I don't want to take up too much time how we did this, but we identified 15.78 million super dyed-in-the-wool environmentalists who are already registered to vote, but did not vote in the 2014 midterm election. 15.78. For some context, only 83 million people voted in that election. Yet there were 15.78 million super environmentalists. These are people you shake them awake in the middle of the night and the first thing out of their mouth is climate change. And they're already registered to vote, but they didn't. They didn't. And so we began to realize it's so important to persuade people to care about climate change. It's so important to elect good environmental leaders and push for sound environmental policies. But until we fix this turnout problem, it's going to be really hard to get any of that. Because even when you elect the great environmental champions, and even when you lobby the you-know-what out of them, if there's no demand in the marketplace, if voters aren't holding their feet to the fire, it's really hard to expect people to lead. It's really hard to expect politicians to lead when voters aren't demanding it. Even the best politicians. And so this was something we really, really wanted to address. Here in Massachusetts, we identified 277,250 super environmentalists who were already registered to vote, who skipped the 2014 gubernatorial election, which was decided by 40,000 votes. And this is a little Orwellian, but this is how politics works these days, so I may as well just pull back the curtain. We know all these people by name and street address. Like, we can find them, and we do. Finally, for a little bit of context, on a national level, we're now at a really big, nice, round number. We have 200 million registered voters, okay? In the 2014 midterm elections, we had turnout of 83 million. Of those 83 million, only 4.2 million were people who listed the environment as one of their top priorities. In the 2016 presidential election, we had 136 million people vote. 10.1 million were super environmentalists. I say projected because, believe it or not, a few states still haven't fully updated their voter files. Where are the others? Well, there's another 10 million up there in that group of registered voters who never ever vote. That's right. Half of all environmentalists who are registered to vote never vote, even though they're already registered. To say that another way, in the presidential election, turnout among all registered voters was 68%. Usually you hear about turnout as a percentage of eligible voters, but in pretty much every state, you can't vote unless you're registered. So it's more helpful to think of it as a percentage of registered voters. Turnout among registered voters was 68%. Turnout among environmentalists who are registered to vote, 50%. In the 2014 midterms, turnout among all registered voters was 44%. Turnout among environmentalists was 21%. We've got a turnout problem. But this is why that's actually not bad news. What we do, pushing these people into the electorate, changing people's habits instead of changing their minds, is actually a heck of a lot easier and cheaper. Have you ever tried to convince someone who's a climate denier to accept science? It's not just like your own experience. Like, behavioral scientists have shown that it is almost impossible. And believe me, as someone who's run a whole bunch of campaigns, it's really expensive too. But finding someone who already deeply cares about the environment and just tweaking their habits a bit so that once, twice, 3 times a year they take the 20 minutes it takes to vote, well, I'm not going to claim that's easy, but it's a heck of a lot easier, and it's a heck of a lot cheaper. And so that's what we do. We don't try to turn any of those blue squares green. We just find all the green squares who aren't voting yet, and we push them into the electorate. I'm going to quickly tell you how we find these people and how we turn them into voters, and then I'm going to finish by giving you some ways that you can get involved very easily to help fix this turnout problem. Because 530 days from tonight, polls are going to close in the 2018 midterm elections. We got a lot of work to do. So, We start by identifying people. If I had 40 minutes to speak instead of 20 minutes, I would go into how data analytics has completely revolutionized politics. But I'll simply say this. The Orwellian society that we live in now means that there are thousands of consumer and behavioral data points that every sophisticated campaign has on everybody. Believe me, the Clinton campaign's voter file had assigned a score from 0 to 100 for every single one of you. Every single one of you. 0 to 100 telling them how likely you were to vote for Clinton. They had another score assigned to every single one of you, telling them how likely you were to vote on Election Day. They had another one from 0 to 100 telling them if you were undecided, how persuadable you were so they could figure out how much money to spend on you. And by the way, the Trump campaign did too. It's a whole lot of lazy journalism, all those people saying that Trump ran an unsophisticated campaign. He probably had the most sophisticated data analytics operation in the history of politics. Using all of this consumer and behavioral data, we're able to very, very accurately identify on an individual level people who deeply care about environmental issues and build a model that helps us find them. Similar to what insurance companies do, right? You fill out really long health forms or life insurance forms, tell them about how much you exercise and what you eat and how much you smoke and drink and all this stuff, and they put it into a very sophisticated algorithm that actually tells them the day you're gonna die. And they sell you a policy based on that. And obviously they're not always right, but they don't need to be. They just need to be right more often than they're wrong. These models are frighteningly right almost all of the time. And what we do is we build these models and then we hire another company to test the accuracy of the models. And 89% of the people we identified listed climate change or the environment as their #1 issue or their #2 issue. If anybody needs to be registered to vote, we'll register them. And then finally, mobilization. I won't get too much into the weeds on this because if you're curious about it, we can discuss it in Q&A. But oddly enough, the one thing that the Environmental Voter Project almost never does when trying to get these people to vote is talk about the environment. For a very good reason. It doesn't work. The latest generation of behavioral scientists have realized that most people don't think about voting as a cost-benefit analysis. They don't think of it as a transaction where they either go out the door or don't go out the door because their one vote is going to affect the outcome of an election, which is going to help this issue that they really, really care about. And I know that's disappointing to all of us who really care about certain policies. But chances are you live this whether you know it or not. I mean, how many of you voted last November? Show of hands. Okay, why? I mean, everybody knew Hillary Clinton was going to take Massachusetts in a landslide. I can almost guarantee you, because of where you live, that none of your state reps and senators were in close races. All 4 of the ballot questions were like huge, destructive victories. I mean, why on earth did you vote? Chances are you haven't. Chances are at some point in your life you decided that it was important to who you are as a person to be a voter. And you did not walk out the door on Election Day because of a transaction, because your one vote actually was going to affect the outcome of any election. And that's how we get environmentalists to vote. Not by having a logical conversation with them about the importance of an election and the importance of environmental issues, because study after study shows that that doesn't increase their likelihood of voting. Instead, we take advantage of their desire to be seen as a voter. And yes, believe it or not, even people who never vote want to be seen as a voter. Our studies have shown that the societal norm of being society still views this norm as being a good thing. People want to be known as being a voter. And so we use pledges. We ask people to promise to vote in every election, and then we remind them of that promise before every election. It increases turnout 4%, which is a big number in this business. Ask Hillary Clinton how big a deal 4% is. It's everything. We also tell people, hey, Ellen, did you know last time there was an election, 93 people on your block voted? We use not so subtle forms of peer pressure like that. But it jacks turnout through the roof. We canvass, we call, we do direct mail, we do digital outreach. We never endorse candidates. Once your goal becomes helping a particular candidate win an election, it no longer makes sense to talk to awful voters. There are a billion groups who endorse environmental candidates and help them get elected. And they do great work. But because they have a short-term goal, they can only focus on the good voters. And the majority of environmentalists are over here, and that's who we want to talk to. Then, I'll very quickly, I already mentioned how accurate we are. Each time in each election we mobilize non-voting environmentalists, we're increasing turnout 4.7 to 5.1%. Over an entire year, after hitting people 4 times, our environmentalists were voting 12.1% higher than the people in our control group. We're getting huge results, and when I say we, I don't mean me, I mean we. Because we work with volunteers, and that's the reason why we're here. All of these 15.78 million super environmentalists who are registered to vote probably aren't going to vote again in 2018 unless people like us do something. But here's the good news. All we need to do is start getting them to vote. And yes, that will change who gets elected, which is important, but even more importantly, simply by changing the makeup of the electorate, simply by pushing the non-voters into the voting universe, it will immediately change policy. I mean, laws are not passed on election day. It's probably the only day when no laws are ever passed. They're passed in the intervening weeks and months and years, and I can guarantee you, as we all sit here tonight, there are hundreds of polls out there. Hundreds of polls. Policymakers at the federal, state, and local level are asking people what issues they care about. But they aren't asking you. They're asking you. They're only asking the voters. Which shouldn't surprise us, right? I mean, we don't expect Starbucks to care about us if we don't drink coffee. We don't expect Ford to market cars to 3-year-olds. Politicians only care about voters. And so simply by pushing all of these environmentalists into the electorate, we can change policy. If we all woke up tomorrow morning and the front page of the New York Times said that likely voters in the 2018 midterm list climate change as their #2 priority, the whole world would change overnight. And we wouldn't have even had an election. So how are we going to do this? Well, you can start here. When I say we know these people by name and street address, I mean it. No matter where you live in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, if you want to canvass and call non-voting environmentalists in your neighborhood, we will help you do it. We love working with local groups. And believe me, it's a pretty easy ask, because you're not trying to twist their arm to vote for your favorite candidate. All you're trying to do is get them to be a more consistent voter. And our research shows that people want to be seen as more consistent voters. And so whether you live in Harvard or Amherst or Boston or Acton, we can help you canvass or call your neighbors and help them become better environmental voters. Similarly, across the state, we can help you do this. More than that, if you want to get involved on the national level, we can do that too. We're running phone banks into Georgia right now. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the 6th congressional district in Georgia has a pretty tight congressional race. We do not endorse candidates, but boy, are we running a lot of phone banks into that congressional district. And we've identified a whole bunch of non-voting environmentalists. I'm going to keep going. I've got 2 more minutes left, but my field director, Peter, is going to hand around volunteer sign-up sheets for people who might be interested, not only in volunteering in Acton or somewhere else in Massachusetts, but if you want to call into Georgia and get more environmentalists to start voting there, we would love to have you do it. So please sign up to volunteer. Just a few more minutes. We are very fortunate that we've gotten some amazing results and people are really excited about the work that we're doing. And so we're going to be expanding from Massachusetts and Georgia into, we hope, 3 or 4 new states later on this summer. Nevada, Colorado, Florida, and Pennsylvania. And there are a whole bunch of non-voting environmentalists in those states. And some really big elections coming up. Mayoral elections, US Senate races, gubernatorials. But I want to be clear. As far as we're concerned, it is always election day. When we find a non-voting environmentalist, we have our volunteers turn them out for school committee races. Not necessarily because that's important for the health of the environmental movement. But remember what I told you, the one thing is that you can't forget tonight. Whether you vote or not is public record. And if Ellen is an environmentalist who has never voted before, and we get her to vote in a school committee race, it only takes 2 months for the record of her voting to show up on the public voter file. And then, when Jen's campaign manager is deciding who they're going to talk to in the upcoming election, and they say, whoa, if Ellen was crazy enough to vote for school committee, like of course she's going to vote in our election. And then, all of a sudden, policymakers are paying attention to her. And so we're turning these environmentalists out for every election. And once they become really good voters, we leave them. They take care of themselves. Campaigns turn them out for us. So, easy action items, what you can do. 3 things. The first thing is pledge to vote. Whether it's you or your children or your neighbors, if you know someone who is a less than perfect voter, we want to help them vote all the time. They can go online and sign our online voter pledge, or they can sign a paper version of the pledges we have out there, and we will remind them to vote before every election, even library trustee races, everything. The second thing is volunteer. As I said, it can be in Acton, it can be in Harvard, it can be in Concord, it can be calling into Georgia or Nevada. But we are always looking for volunteers to help us fix this voter turnout problem. And finally, I hope you'll do one of those 2, but if you don't, at the very least, don't just vote. We need to be loud and proud about the fact that we as environmentalists see voting as one of the most important ways we express ourselves. Because peer pressure works. It works extraordinarily well. I'm glad we're in a middle school because we've really never left junior high. Peer pressure is the best way to get someone to vote. And so if all of you make sure that all of your friends know that you vote because you're an environmentalist, and that is one of the most important ways that you express yourself as an environmentalist, that in and of itself will be really, really powerful. So I'll finish with this one thing. Please, please, please do not leave here tonight thinking like, oh God, I heard this Stinnett guy talk and like environmentalists don't vote, we're all going to hell, this is awful. This is good news. What would be bad news is if I told you we ran lots of polls and studies and realized that nobody cares about the environment. That would be awful news. But that's not what we found. We've actually won the battle for the hearts and minds. We might even have a green majority in this country. Tens of millions of already registered Americans care so deeply about climate change and the environment that it's one of their top issues. We just need to get them to vote. And that's a heck of a lot easier than having to change everybody's mind. It's like showing up to a basketball game and realizing all your best players are there. They're just not in the game yet. And so please, I hope you take this as being a hopeful and exciting message. And also a very easy way to get involved. So please, please, please support great policy at the state level and the local level and the federal level. And please, I see great organizations here like Mothers Out Front and Clean Water Action. Support these great organizations and be an activist in your community. But if you can also spend some time making sure that everybody who cares about these issues votes in every election, votes all the time, votes as often as NRA members vote, well then we're going to win in no time at all. In no time at all. So, thank you. Thank you.
So, Senator Jamie Eldridge has served as state senator for the Middlesex and Worcester district since January 2009. With years of service on organizations like the Acton Conservation Trust, Nashua River Watershed Association, and Organization for the Assabet River, Jamie understands the value of protecting the environment and recognizes that the ethic of passing a healthier environment onto future generations is a true legacy of this district. Jamie has filed many bills that have been passed this year, and he has filed a significant number of additional bills within the Senate in support of a positive environmental policy. As I said, we worked with his office and came up with a quick PowerPoint of his work on the environment, and Ellen Sachs-Leisher is here to share this info with you. Please welcome Ellen/Jamie.
All right, so I want to start with a little bit of a personal piece before I get into Jamie's piece, and I just wanted to say that, you know, I wanted to have this event, and because my husband and I have always cared about the environment. I mean, we recycle, we compost, we have solar panels, you know, we contribute to all the organizations that we can. But I got a little scared. And so when the Activist Alliance came along, that was the group I joined, the environmental group, as well as others. So I know people's time is limited. I think what Nathaniel said today will show you that you can do a lot with a little time. And that's what I wanted to learn tonight. I mean, I had questions I wanted to ask from the audience side, and here I am going to tell you what Jamie has to say. But I think that's the reason we're here today, whether you have an interest in the national, the state, the local, whatever your interest is, that if you have a passion, that you can take some time every day to do a little bit to support the environment. I think we're going to see some of the things that Jamie's involved with. That might be something you care about and want to be behind, or what Nathaniel's talking about, or Jen or Eric. But I think the importance is to go home today with maybe something that you really can do. And that's what I started this with. I wanted to know what I could do. All right. I also want to, before I start with Jamie's piece, I want to thank Kristen, who can't really acknowledge herself when she's up here. But Kristen started the Activist Alliance. I know she said she was a member. She started it. She was the one who had the idea. She's the one that got people together. And if it wasn't for her and her brainchild, a lot of us wouldn't be here tonight, and Karen and I wouldn't be working on this. Okay. Thank you, Kristen. So, this is Jamie's presentation, and I can't answer very many questions. Okay. How does this work now? No? I'm pointing. Go ahead, thank you. Just push it. Okay. All right, so what we had asked the presenters to do, and that Jen and Eric are going to do also, we said, please tell us what the risks are. Tell us what you're doing about those risks, and then tell us what we can do to help. All right, so up here I have, and I should be looking at my own screen here. These are the risks. I can't get mine to work. These are the risks that, some of them that Jamie pointed out to us that should be of concern to us in Massachusetts. So some of these, I mean, a lot of them you know, some of them may be new. The inadequate investment in renewable energy to meet global warming solutions, natural gas leaks. I guess there's quite a bit of this going on, which was a lack of pipeline maintenance. If you've watched the Flint, Michigan issues, we have a grade D on lead in public school drinking water. We lack adequate funding, and I think Jen Benson will get into some of that too, on environmental agencies that protect our resources, and that, according to Jamie, we really need a comprehensive management plan to identify and adapt to climate change. Okay, so these are the things I asked Jamie to give me some examples. So, am I going to try this again? There we go. So what has been done? If I can get to my next slide. So these are bills, and again, I think what I'm going to say here is that if you go to Jamie's website from the government page, you can really get information on these bills. So I'm just going to, these are just some that are out there. I'm not going to go into the details. I can't speak on that behalf. And I think some of them do carry over, Jen, to the House side. So Jen will do more to that. But these are some of the ones that are up there that Jamie has on his site. So transition in Massachusetts to 100% renewable energy, protection for consumers of gas and electricity from paying for the leaks that we just talked about, that I just mentioned, and unaccounted gas. promoting solar power in the green economy, promoting low-income access to solar, clarifying authority and responsibilities of the Department of Public Utilities, and a few others. Reducing plastic bags, introducing water bottle filling stations in the public schools, assistance with drought management, and promoting zero-emission vehicles. So these are bills that are out there now. I can't tell you what the progress on them are. I can't say, if you go on the site, you can see some of that. And I didn't want to get in, again, into the details without Jamie being here. So that's what Jamie's doing. So there's the risk. Jamie's putting the bills forward. He co-sponsors a fair number of them. He also, joins on with others who have sponsored. So what can we do? And again, I'm being what Jamie has said. So one is, and I think some of us do this, is call or email state reps and senators to urge them to support those bills. And I would say, and ask them to be a co-sponsor. I would say here, and I think Jen will hopefully confirm this too, they need to hear, and as even Nathaniel said, they need to hear that you support these things. Not just know, they need to know that there's support behind them. Not just that they put them forward and they don't know who their supporters are. Attend public hearings at the State House for bills you support. You can testify for up to 3 minutes on anything you want, and there's the link. Again, if you go to the government pages, you can find the link for when these bills are coming up and when they're having hearings. You can submit written testimony, particularly of a support to a committee chair. So sometimes I feel, well, why do I have to tell Jamie and Ben? Jen, they know 20 times over that I support this, but I never think about, what about the committee chair? They need to hear it too. Ask local officials to support legislations through a resolution, and then to attend a public event. These are the kind of ideas, again, that if you get passionate about something and there's something you want to follow, these are things that you can do, and some of them take very little time. I've called the governor's office, I've called Jamie's and Jen's office, and just left messages and said, this is what I support. Okay, so, and I'm going to be short here because I can't be Jamie. So, on this one, this is one of the co-chairs of, and I'm going to say what it is. So there's the committee chair for what they're doing around the state on the environment. And we were just going to play a little bit of this so you can get a little sense of what this is about.
The Senate Committee on Global Warming and Climate Change is headed to 9 communities in Massachusetts to hear your thoughts on clean energy and climate. These public hearings are a perfect opportunity for you, our constituents, to make your voice heard and let the legislature know that you want a healthy, sustainable, and strong state. Give us your thoughts. Give us your suggestions. My colleagues and I will be there. We'll be in 9 communities throughout our state, and we would love for you to join us. In the meantime, you can tweet your thoughts by tweeting at MACleanFuture or using the hashtag MACleanFuture. Please come out and join us.
Okay, so that was the final piece here. But again, I think we're just trying to say that there's many things that you can do. I think Jen Benson will add much more to that. But these are at least some pieces and some ideas, and you can go online and see more from what Jamie has been doing with bills at the State House. Thank you.
Our third panelist is State Representative Jennifer Benson. State Representative Jennifer Benson was first elected to represent the Massachusetts 37th Middlesex District in 2008 and is currently the chair of the Joint Committee on Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure. In addition to chairing the committee, Jen serves as one of the state directors for women in government. Since her first term in office, Jen has been passionate about environmental and energy issues. She previously served on the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Public Utilities, and Energy, and has filed legislation every session to protect the environment and reduce the use of fossil fuels. Thank you. This session, she has filed legislation to put a price on carbon, which has been endorsed by prominent environmental and energy groups. Please welcome State Representative Jennifer Benson.
10, 15, 20 years ago, well, even more than 20 years ago when I was having my kids. You know, I would talk about worrying about the environment in terms of my grandchildren, my children and my grandchildren. And now when I talk to people, I'm saying this is for you. This isn't about future generations. We have done so little for so long that the damage that has been done will be very hard, if not impossible, to reverse. And our goal is to start to bend that curve moving into the future. I lived in Florida for years, and there's not much above sea level in Florida, let me tell you. And I've seen it. I've been all over the state. You know, we are going to start losing property, which is money, land mass, and that's one of the ways in my talking to people who aren't necessarily, you know, really environmentalists, when you start talking about in economic terms, what it's going to cost people to not do something, or how can we create an environmental economy that actually lifts everyone up. And here in Massachusetts, we've seen with solar, an entirely new sector of the economy grow up. This is employing a lot of people in Massachusetts. It's creating a lot of excitement. I was going to say energy, but that's probably too punny for today. So there's a lot of ancillary benefits to doing the right thing. And, you know, having those conversations with people who are, say, on boards of selectmen or on finance committees on towns, and saying, one of the ways you can save money for your town is look at green energy investment and energy efficiency. So they may not even believe in climate change, but they want the money for their town. So there are some open doors, and as we have these conversations, I think it's really important to remember that you don't have to be a dyed-in-the-wool environmentalist to embrace a lot of these ideas. And especially the bill I'm going to talk about the most, putting a price on carbon, that's a concept that is embraced by economists, environmentalists, conservatives, because it's a market-driven approach, and it really starts to integrate the social costs of carbon with what we're actually doing to support our environment. So I think it's really the future. It's something we all have to be talking about, rather than taking sort of a piece-by-piece approach. It incorporates the whole life cycle of fossil fuels, and I believe it will, while reducing carbon use, will increase a new economy in its place. So let's get into that. So people say to me they don't understand what carbon pricing is. And I think this is actually probably the biggest testament to why I'm a bad politician, because a lot of people call this a carbon tax. So yes, so I filed a bill that a lot of people will say is going to increase taxes. And that's probably a bad thing to do when you're a politician, I assume. But quite frankly, with all of the research, this is really the way that everyone is starting to point, that we have to be having this discussion. This is going to have the most comprehensive impact to our fossil fuel use moving forward, while incentivizing renewable energy and energy efficiency. So what this does is puts a price on a ton of carbon emission. And so why do we care about that? Well, we care about it because A, yes, it's a greenhouse gas and it's bad for the environment. It's also bad for public health. And we have studies, and actually a study was just released about a month or so ago for Massachusetts in particular, the public health impacts of carbon emissions, and putting a price on carbon, the impact that would have on lives saved and healthcare dollars saved right here in Massachusetts. So one of the other issues, though, I've heard, is why should we be doing this on just a state level? We should be doing this on a federal level, because can one state make that big a dent in carbon emissions? And this was sort of my thought for a long time. because obviously emissions don't stay within our geographic borders, right? So we can't necessarily change the dynamic for an entire country by doing this just in one state. My hope is, like so many other things, Massachusetts has been a leader, and we can prove that it can be done. And by doing that, we're already talking, and I've had meetings with our neighboring states who are all looking at this issue, but they're all waiting for Massachusetts to do it. We're the furthest along. We have multiple bills filed around this. And if we can show it can be done, then these other states will hopefully push their legislation through and start picking up that mantle. And we can create some momentum around this idea. But somebody has to be first. And quite frankly, risks, I don't think our current administration in Washington is going to be looking at significant environmental legislation. It's just a guess. You know, he clearly likes the sun, and maybe he's worried, I don't know. But, you know, he's cut 31% from the EPA budget. He's cut 6% from the Department of Energy. He's eliminated protections of water, is pushing back on fossil fuel regulations, the CAFE standards for cars, I mean, all sorts of things. And so this is why, finally this term, I decided I'm just gonna take the bull by the horns, because clearly Washington has walked away from this issue. And so states, as laboratories of innovation, it's up to us to prove it can be done. And so I think Massachusetts, as we have done with healthcare and so many other things, we need to step up to the plate and make it happen. So the idea of this bill is, so we put a price on carbon, okay? And so we're saying that now we are internalizing all of the environmental health costs that are happening to our citizens, to our environment, and capturing that within this price. The other thing we're doing, though, is there's a kind of a two-pronged structure to this. One is it increases the cost. So like a gas tax would, it increases the cost on this fuel, okay? So in that, it de-incentivizes using vehicles or driving more, or using vehicles that are very bad, gas guzzlers and whatever, right? So if that's like the simple, straightforward, we all get that. That's how gas taxes work. That's how cigarette taxes work. That's how all of these sort of sin or, taxes, that things we want people to use less of, we increase the cost. So simple. It also has a behavioral economic aspect to it, because you're going to get some of that money back. So why would we do that? Well, because we're going to take, now in my bill, 80% of all the revenue that comes in from this fee or price or tax, whatever you want to call it. It's going to come into the state, into a fund. 80% of that's going to go back to you. It's going to go back to each member of your family. It's going to go back to your business. It's going to go back to your employees. And so when you, as a consumer, get that check back, that rebate check back, now we're touching you again and saying, hey, remember when you were paying a little more for gas? Here's a check, you're getting some of that back. If you drive a Prius, you're going to get to keep more of that money. That's new money to you. That's revenue. If you're driving a Ford pickup, maybe that rebate check isn't quite covering how much you actually spent. So now you're thinking, if I didn't use so much fuel, this is like getting free money, right? So the behavioral economics of this is, not only are we making you think about it again, but it's making you think about, how can I pocket more of this money? And this is a really important aspect to this, and it may seem trivial, but studies show that it actually does make a significant difference. So we're getting people in two totally different ways. Now, the other thing that this bill does is it takes 20% of that revenue. So my bill, you'll hear some of these bills, people will talk about this as revenue neutral. or revenue positive. This is a revenue positive bill, and I'll tell you why. You saw some of this in Jamie's slides. One of the things we've done here is we have a really good sort of solar, the SREC program. I'm sure many of you, I've used it. I have solar in my house. Terrific. So a lot of people over the last several years who are well positioned to put solar on their house, either because, you know, they can afford it and they have sort of the right orientation of their roof and everything else that works. But so we have a lot of saturation in that market, right, with solar panels. That's terrific. How do we start to branch out and get into other areas of the marketplace? So 20% of that fund will go to do just that. It'll go to communities who maybe want to do community-wide projects. It'll go to energy efficiency projects, maybe for schools and town halls, to regional projects where maybe groups of towns might get together to do a larger project. Go to public transportation, increasing public transportation where there currently isn't any or limited options. And, you know, even things like helping small businesses put solar on their business or energy efficiency projects in their business for low interest or no interest loans. So there's a lot of ideas that we can use that money for, and to sort of start to address some of those underutilized areas. One that is clearly spelled out in the bill, though, is multi-unit dwellings and rental units, because that is a population we have not been able to get to. And we have to make sure that if we're really going to make a difference, we have to make a difference in every sector of the economy. And one thing I did forget, those rebates, to make sure that we're saturating new areas of the marketplace. The rebates are weighted. And so the lowest 2 quintiles of income level here in Massachusetts would get a slightly higher rebate, because we want them to invest more into energy efficiency, whatever they can do. And that helps them become more economically stable by decreasing their energy costs at home. So it has a multi-pronged impact. So I have a few other bills that, you know, are, there we go, important. I'm going to breeze through them. I think the carbon pricing bill is getting the most interest, but I see this as a very important issue and kind of a companion piece. Grid modernization. Now, if we want to talk about a lot of increases to, say, the SREC program, or energy storage, for example, we have to invest in our grid. We have an antiquated system that is fragile, that can't handle a lot of the newer technology. And so if we really want to maximize all of these investments, we also have to maximize our grid capacity and capability. So, you know, this piece I think is important because, and it's not as exciting and people aren't really talking about it as much, but I think it's something that we have to address, because a lot of the new technology that we're talking about and a lot of the areas we want to go into in energy, renewable energy, our grid simply cannot is not flexible enough to accept all those new technologies. So by working with the DPU and the state and others, this is going to become critically important. And we've already seen in some areas of the state where grid issues have held up renewable projects. And so it's already becoming an impediment to progress. So these are just some more bills that I've either co-sponsored, helped write, whatever. All of this is available on the legislature's website. You can track bills. I do want to say, so as we talk about advocacy and what you can do, one thing is know what has been filed. what you feel you want to advocate for and know where they are in the process so you know when to advocate. And I think that's really important. So when bills are coming up for hearings, you want to know that. You want to send testimony, show up to testify, make phone calls, get friends to do the same. And so you can do that on the malegislature.gov website. You can have alerts sent to you when the bills you're tracking come up. You can search for bills by keyword. It's a really great site that's recently been redone to make it more user-friendly, so I really encourage you all to use it. We can always help you too. So if you're in my district and you need to know where a bill is in the process, just give us a call and we'll help you. And look at, I'm so good, I'm ahead of this thing. So you're doing something right now, right? And I think what Nathaniel said is absolutely important. We all need to vote. I mean, that's just really, I mean, we wouldn't have the problems we have in Washington right now had more people like us, who think like us, had gotten out to vote. My husband actually is a statistician and does sort of he's like doing the Nate Silver thing for Massachusetts. He has a blog and he's been tracking all of this voting data for a long time. And we know the numbers. We should be able to, we have projected pretty accurately how elections will turn out. And the biggest problem is people don't vote. When you see voter turnout in the 20%, 30% range, Harvard is an anomaly, I will say. Very high voter turnout in Harvard. Yes, thank you. But this is a problem. And we do have, 2018, a great opportunity to turn over at least the House. And if you're not thinking about that every single day, there's a problem. Yeah. Because we can all wake up, I haven't been sleeping. I literally wake up in the middle of the night and wonder, what are we going to do? That's what I think about. That's like, I don't count sheep. I count votes in my head and days until the 2018 midterm. And we should all be doing that. That's our opportunity to make a difference. Whether it's for any of the issues that were polled, all of them would be better off if we flipped the House in 2018. So I will close because we're going to answer questions. Just to say that I really appreciate you being here. The fact that people, the one good thing about President Trump is that I think people have woken up. And so those of us who have been doing this for a long time, prior to 2008, I was a school committee member for 5.5 years, so yes, vote for school committee. The apathy is deafening. And there's I have a lot of colleagues who are fantastic people who just choose not to do this anymore because people aren't paying attention and it's really hard work. It's really hard work and it's frustrating. And so the fact that more and more people are turning out and getting motivated and sounding the alarm, I find that to be the most inspiring thing. So thank you so much, and I look forward to answering your questions.
So our final panelist is Eric Broadbent. Eric is a software engineer by occupation, an energy nerd by avocation. He has served as a member of the Harvard Energy Advisory Committee since its inception in 2008 and helped the town achieve green community status in 2010. Since then, he helped drive the Solarized Mass program in Harvard, along with the formation of the Massachusetts' first member-owned, community-shared solar garden. Currently, I'm not done. Currently, he is working with others on the Energy Advisory Committee to build Harvard's Community Choice Aggregation Program, along with an energy storage pilot project at the Brumfield School. Please welcome Eric Broadbent.
I'm going to tell a few stories today, how I got here and the moment that we're in. We know that this last election was upsetting. And one of the things that I think affected me a lot was how much we were getting in touch, the organizations were getting in touch with us about fundraising and about getting, or the urgency of this. And that only increased after the election. I feel like whatever we didn't do before the election, people were trying to make up for after the election with more fundraising pitches. Now, fundraising is important. I know many of you are probably also on the many lists for environmental organizations and others, but one a day, so we're getting that. After the election, I think many of us kind of did a checklist. What are we likely to lose at the federal level because of this election? And the EPA, we know that the cuts are on the way according to the budget. How many people saw the New York Times front page over the weekend? It's about Arctic sea ice loss. By the end of this century, studies now indicate 6-foot rise. So not just Florida underwater, but most of the world's inhabitants are at risk. And it will speed up from there. Now, this isn't a conclusion. This is now considered to be a possible scenario, whereas before it was not. And yet, in the same issue, it talks about EPA cuts, 40%. From the Office of Science and Technology, which handles most of the research and and then also the regulatory staff. So it's pedal to the metal on drilling and pipelines and cut back on funding for environmental protection. And then the other, also on the list are all these other important steps that have been taken during the last during the years that we had a different administration. So elections matter. But what are we going to do about this? So I don't know, I had this idea and I was talking with other people, hey, we need a people's EPA. We can't, if we're going to be losing our federal agencies, we need to step up. How many people have heard people's EPA that haven't heard it from me? I don't know if it's, okay, good. Well, I registered the domain. I haven't had time to do anything with it, but we'll see. So it's clear that many of us already are in EPA in what we do, what we notice, what we care about, what we see, and what we advocate for. But we actually can do a lot of the work. We can't do everything. We're not scientists, many of us. But so I started to think about that. And then I realized, well, there's already a lot of organizations around that are doing this work. Are they being effective? Can we help them? Do we even know about them? So we sort of have, and this gets to what Nathaniel talked about, we sort of have the people in the room, but we're not working together. Maybe we're not doing everything we could do together. And of course, the front lines are the farmers and the fishermen and those who depend on natural resources for their livelihood. So they're going to be in the fight too. So I have a friend who's senior at NRDC, and I called him up and I said, well, should I just donate to the national orgs or what? And he said, well, yes, but what you have in Massachusetts and what has been established in California are some of the most important policies in the country. And in fact, the Clean Power Plan would be a setback for us in Massachusetts, believe it or not. We participate in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We have a renewable portfolio standard. We'll see elections matter there too. And we have the Green Communities Act. California Air Resources Board has strict standards on emissions that they set the national standard for efficiency ratings for vehicles. The Trump administration may be trying to knock that down too. So we have to play defense now. Most of you have heard of ALEC. They are very effective. We are playing defense in this moment. There's no question. So how did we get here? Maybe did we, some thoughts, maybe with all these strong policies and programs, And with us being reduced to donations and collectivism, maybe we thought that we don't have to fight anymore. I don't know. There's some thoughts. So I'm thinking about all this, and I got a phone call or an email, I forget which, from a friend in Harvard who said, hey, are there any environmental groups in Harvard and green advocacy groups in Harvard? And I said, well, yeah. We had something called Harvard Local. I don't know how many people have heard of. There's been Harvard Local, Bolton Local. There was a local movement in the 2000s that was pretty strong, and it was really effective. We did a lot of work. We participated in rallies. We had local events. We did educational events. It spawned a local farmers market, a community garden, and an energy efficiency group that helped people. I remember we had an event where we looked at what various kinds of CFL bulbs would do and how many watts they put out. So we really worked at re-engaging people and engaging people in climate and energy issues. Baker got elected, and we had some strong policies that came about in the state. As I mentioned, the Green Communities Act. The Green Communities Division put out a program. I believe Acton is a green community. Of course you are. Harvard's a green community. In order to get there, you have to have some votes at town meeting. And we had them, and we passed. And that was not in a vacuum. We had the backing of all of those people who had been touched during the Harvard local days and who were part of it. We went on from there because we were a green community. We could be a solarized town. So many people heard about that and wanted to participate that couldn't because their local conditions weren't optimal. So that was the genesis of the Harvard Solar Gardens. I want to mention we have a member of the company that built that in the audience tonight, Haskell Werland. Thank you. And those required more votes, but we got them. Wasn't a problem. So since then, we've continued as a green community, but really the work has been, shall we say, channeled into a few one committee maybe, and maybe some others. The school, there's some involvement. But I think we had so much success and there were so many strong programs that we thought maybe we were done. So while we continue, some of us on the Energy Committee continue to work on these programs, there's not a cadre of people in town anymore that are active and that can change the local politics. So instead of this being part of the town's ethics, it's not, and maybe that's what Nathaniel also spoke to, is that if you poll the general populace, it's not there. So same question, what happened? So now, in Massachusetts, the renewable portfolio standard's not being increased. That means that the grid doesn't need to have as much renewable energy put on it as before, as it should have, which should be increasing. We've had to fight off pipelines. Some of them are going to go in. We're playing defense clearly. So instead of values-driven policy, it's all about the money. This has happened to us in our local boards and committees. We've had budget cuts. We can't staff a land use board the way we used to. The Board of Health has a budget of sub $1,000 for our town. They take care of so many things for us. We wanted an energy manager in town. Acton has an energy manager. Congratulations. Harvard hasn't been able to get it. And this is because the default policy has become money-based rather than value-based. So we've lost some opportunities along the way. We could have participated in several programs if we had the horsepower in town to people to step up and take these opportunities. So we really need to get re-engaged. So I'm going to go back to the question that was asked, how do we get there? And so I started to think about a local forum or an environmental forum. And I wanted to have there be some national, some state, and some local scope. So I actually called Jamie and Jen's office and invited them to come to the forum. I started talking with local boards and committees. What are we really doing this? I talked to the students. 4 of them are here tonight from the Brownfield Green Team, which is awesome. I think there are probably more. And I got a call back from Sean on Jen's staff, and he said, "Is this the same forum as the Activist Alliance Forum?" And Ellen's question, are there green groups in Harvard, came back. And so that's kind of a story of, we went on from there. Ellen and I had several meetings and phone calls. We talked about what we wanted to achieve together. So this forum is focusing on the higher level issues. And the questions are, what are the risks and challenges? What are you doing about them for each organization? And how can people help? We decided it was most effective to have a regional forum like this, address the state and national, and hopefully for other towns that are here or in our area, a local forum can happen. And I'm finally going to get to what we're going to do at our local forum. So not every town does need one. So if you look at what Concord does, they are even talking about going net zero and adopting a resolution to do that, like Cambridge. So maybe it doesn't make sense to have it in your town. Maybe your town already has an active, participation from in all your boards and committees and the selectmen. But in Harvard, we're working back to that level. So this is the model that Ellen and I talked about, where the regional forum is the yellow triangle, and that will be top heavy on national and state issues, and our local forum will be inverted and mostly talk about local, but there's some crossover. So we're going to talk a little bit about the state issues at the local forum. It's next week. And we're going to have presentations from our boards. The Board of Health covers pest control and, ticks, mosquitoes, whether you should spray, and they cover sewage and sanitation, water testing. The Conservation Commission is going to talk about what they do, how you can help. The Pond Committee is going to be there. It's an important natural resource in town. I'm having trouble, maybe this thing is, okay. And the Energy Committee. So in my bio introduction, we talked about community choice aggregation. How many people know what that means? Great. Okay, so that is actually one way that you can democratize the clean energy fight, or struggle, battle, whatever, marching forward. Towns can take over from the utility the responsibility of contracting for energy for the residents and businesses. And any town can do it. Over 80 already have in Massachusetts. You just have to pass a local bylaw, which we were able to. And then a group in town becomes the buying group for your town. You work with a broker. So a lot of people don't know anymore, well, because there are these alternative suppliers, what's the best way to go? This takes that burden off people, and they will be, if we go with a cleaner energy supply mix, you're doing something at a much bigger level. And then we're also going to be having presentations from the Green Team on what they're doing in the school. They've done a lot of good work, and I know they're poised to do a lot more. And then as part of, the Conservation Trust as well, they protect our open space and conservation lands, trails. They also look at invasives. Every group up there, aside from the Green Team, will be presenting how can students, are there student internships or things that students can do? But the 3 questions are, what are the risks you see? I think I might be on the next slide. It's the same thing. Then there's a formal program and then an informal program, and this is where we hope to hear from all the other groups in our town, as well as surrounding areas. So National River Watershed Association, I hope, will be there. There are other groups in town that are doing the work. And so we're going to go with kind of an open mic format where we're going to ask for people to step up and identify a risk, what should be done about it. No, don't spray in your yard because the bees are going to be affected, or use these chemicals instead. And that's where we also hope to hear from people who aren't necessarily connected with an organization but have something to say. Every successful effort I've been involved in has been a combination of citizens, a public agency, and sometimes a private agency. You do a lot more when you engage all these sectors, so we're looking forward to that. So that's our Facebook page, created by the Brownfield Green Team. And it's a little bit of poll on what why people love Harvard, our apple trees in our pond. So that's why I'm here. That's why we're all here, I think, is to play a role in protecting those things, both at the local, state, and national level. I'm finishing up, but I want to, ask people to consider whether a forum or something like this makes sense in your town. I also am making a fairly bold statement in saying that a lot of decisions have been driven lately by, money rather than values. I recognize that, hey, not everybody can afford when their taxes are raised, but this is getting values back into the discussion is important, and that's what maybe we don't have the capacity to raise taxes and fund a position for an energy manager in town. I think we would, but that's what democracy is all about, is getting back in the fight. Somebody mentioned programs for low income and environmental justice, and the best way to fix a lot of problems at once is to have an environmental program that engages communities that are underserved. And I heard about a program in Illinois where funding was raised for I couldn't put it in the slide, energy efficiency jobs training for people getting out of jail or prison and foster kids. And so these people are trained in insulating homes and retrofitting. And that just kind of warms my heart to hear that kind of program. And I hope we can do more of that. I don't know if this resonates with everybody, in terms of how these issues are framed, but we're going to find out. So thank you.
I'm Tara Fredericks from Acton. First of all, I'd like a comment. I think that through the research that we've been doing on carbon fee, the thing that seems to work with the folks that are anti-tax is to have people pay for what they use. So that way it's about people who are using the environmental resources, they pay for them. So then I was going to make the mention that when you were talking about the paying for what you use, does it include construction and all the costs of growing the trees and moving the trees and everything else? Because the GWSA is not, doesn't currently account for that. No, okay. And then I was going to ask Jamie a question, and since he's not here, I'm going to ask it anyways, because, and I was a little upset that he's not here because he's co-sponsoring an accelerated construction bill that I believe is giving environmental subsidies for stuff we don't need. And he's also on the board of the Metro Future Development Project, which doesn't even mention the environment in its mission. So if people talk to him, please ask him about that. And then I want to ask Jen if she would work to make sure that the bills are reconciled for carbon footprint. So all these development and growth and all that stuff, that it comes back to a reconciliation of the environmental impact. So reducing certain things, but when the other stuff is all going way up, then I'm just hoping you will have a response to that. Thank you. Oops.
Well, I do not, thank you, Tara. I don't have a specific response to that. One of the issues, and when we were looking at we did a lot of research in the carbon pricing bill, and we really wanted to focus in on things that were quantifiable. There were a lot of areas of potential expansion of this bill and this concept, but the problem is moving forward with that, we really wanted to hone in on what we know today, how we can measure that, and what the impacts of that will be. And there are several areas, I would say this as being one of them, that we discussed and thought of, and yet it's very, very hard to put a price and a compensatory package together for that. So, other areas, for example, that we discussed and went back and forth about were farmlands, dairy farming, beef farming. There's a lot of agricultural carbon emission issues that are also very hard to quantify, and we felt were really better left out of this legislation. Also, if you look at especially natural gas is a big issue, and sourcing of natural gas and the whole lifespan of extraction to use. We put some study language in this legislation. Right now, we don't have a good mechanism to account for like line leakage, who should pay for that. And so there needs to be more work in that area as well. So this is certainly a good starting point based on examples from especially Canada. It's a good place to start, and it's something that I think is easy to understand and very quantifiable. But that does not mean into the future, as we gain access to some of this other data, that we couldn't also include more issues in the future.
Hi, Kathleen Sullivan from Acton, and I appreciate all of the presentations. They were very good. The one thing that I often think of when I'm in meetings like this is that the environmental movement has a major problem, which Eric alluded to at the end of his presentation, which is that our movement is just too white. Too many of the people in the environmental movement look like me and sound like me. When during Nathaniel's presentation, I've worked on immigrant rights policy for about a little bit over 30 years, and a number of my clients, although I don't do voter-related work, a number of my clients are targeting for voter registration and for voter turnout exactly the same states that are on your map. So I think that all of us need to be doing a better job of thinking about how people of color are really sort of centrally oriented within this movement. Otherwise, we will wake up with a multicultural organization in a few decades and an environment that is, continues to have real problems.
Thank you, Kathleen. I think you're exactly right. And I think in a lot of our research on identifying people who don't just consider themselves to be environmentalists or would be considered by any objective measure to be environmentalists, but we really try to focus in on the people who list climate change or some other environmental issue as one of their top priorities. And I think it's so important that folks realize that the old stereotypes no longer hold true. And right now, a Latino grandmother living in Phoenix is more likely to care about climate change than some yuppie in a blue blazer or a hipster in Portland, Oregon. And you're absolutely right to recognize that not only does the movement look way too white, but at least in the voter mobilization world, the people we're trying to target, the people we're trying to make sure vote, don't look like us. And so I completely agree with you, not just from an ethical standpoint, but from a tactical standpoint. We are at our most effective in mobilizing these people if we can relate to them on every level. And right now, I'm not sure that the movement can. So I think you bring up a very good point.
I'll just add one thing to that. I think there's a big perception issue. So when we talk about climate change, I think the perception for a lot of people is that it's something that's going to happen in the future, and it's philosophical, it's a moral, value-based issue. But if you look at health disparities, right, which is in this community that we're talking about, urban centers, climate change, if you look at health disparities, look at rates of asthma in kids, okay? That's a pretty easy one, there's lots of data on it. That matches very well with those increased rates of asthma with urban centers that have also high smog or emissions, right? These are married issues. And so, you know, when we're talking about climate change, we have to talk about it more as a more real, tangible issue than something that might happen into the future or that scientists talk about. These have real impacts, daily impacts on lives, and I think health is a big driver, and it's something that people can understand. So when cities are paying through public health departments, rip out carpeting and install air conditioning in public housing and low-income housing because they are trying to change this asthma issue because it's a huge money driver in healthcare. This should be one of those conversations as well. How do we make our air cleaner for these kids? We've talked about it in suburban school districts around idling school buses, and yet we're not having those conversations in inner cities. So I think it's up to us, the people who look like us, to start broadening this conversation and change the perception of what climate change really is. Because it is a daily impact to all people and not just a scientific exercise or a future concern.
How many people went to the climate rally in Boston a couple of weeks ago? Right. Workshops. There was a workshop on how to be a white ally for climate justice, and that's where I heard about that program in Illinois from Reverend Marie Singa, I think, and that's inspiring. And so I think we need to be asking ourselves, how do we connect the dots? It's not going to happen. There aren't policies yet that are put in place. We have to start that outreach and think about what communities we can start to ally with. Absolutely. Thank you.
Sharon Chappella. I am kind of heading the Climate Action Group for one of the 200 indivisible groups that exist across Massachusetts. Now, it's just the indivisible groups. Then there are all the huddle groups that came after the Women's March. So there, and this group, which doesn't have indivisible in its name, and so we are the lobbying dream that you have always wanted. And the issue really is how we can get the word out to all of these groups. We're trying to figure out how to connect us for this, but it really is an opportunity. And one of the things that I'd like to ask is there a way for you then, as a leader here, and I think Jamie is another one, to have somebody on your staff available so that we can call and say, who do we need to talk to other than you about these bills? Because there was a wonderful article on A2 in the Boston Globe today about California and how the whole California legislative and governmental process is in on environment and environmental justice as a way of kind of holding the barrier against what the Trump administration is trying to do. I think we can actually get the people you need to pass these wonderful bills. And by the way, the carbon fee is so wonderful because it's already proven. We know it works. This is not something new, so we have to do it.
I will tell you that just the quick and dirty answer to any piece of legislation you want to advocate for, regardless of subject matter. There's really only, once a bill has been filed and referred to committee, there's only a few people you have to talk to. The committee chairs and the Speaker's office and the Senate President's office. I mean, that sounds very undemocratic, but it's absolutely true. Obviously, the filer of the bill, co-sponsor of the bill, they're already doing that work. They're already advocating. They've put their name publicly on a document that they believe they support and are willing to back up. They're doing that work already. At that point, it's you got to get it out of committee and you got to get it on the floor. And the two gatekeepers there are the committee chairs and the leadership, whether it's the Speaker's office in the House or the Senate President's office in the Senate. They really decide what ultimately will make it to the floor for a vote. And especially a bill like the carbon pricing bill, it is and will be considered a tax. And so that is asking a lot of members who are nervous. And so those members who have not sponsored or co-sponsored the legislation, who may be in swing districts, it's important to find people in those districts that will not threaten them, but that will say, I will support you and work for you if you push to get this bill passed and vote for it. They need support. So oftentimes it's fear that people aren't pushing or supporting this kind of legislation because they're worried about a backlash. They really need to hear from people who will help them and support them moving forward so they feel they have that backing of their district. Because I hear from people all the time, my district doesn't like that. Well, of course, not every member and not every constituent in that district will like it. In my district, I could say that about the bill I filed. But there will be people who like it, but they have to speak up.
Hi, I'm an Acton resident, and I'm going to piggyback on that 3 points on the carbon pricing bill. First was the question of timing of making these phone calls. Is the time now to start calling the chairman? Are we? Is there a timing issue? What do you think are the biggest barriers for passage for this? And then the third question is about the rebate. Is there an incentive for people to use the rebate for other environmental uses that you mentioned? I don't know whether that was a hope that that's what people would do or whether there's an incentive built into the bill.
So all right, I'm going to start backwards. So the rebate, there's no specific incentive, it's money. But you're getting money, you're getting a whole rebate for all the adults in your household and a half rebate for all the kids in your household. And with that rebate, there will be communication around why you're getting this money and ideas of how to spend it. But it's cash in their pocket. So if they want to consider it as a refund of the carbon tax or price that they have paid throughout the year and just pocket it and put it in their savings account, that's totally fine. If they'd like to invest it in, looking ways to, get a smart thermostat or upgrade light bulbs or whatever you want to do, that's their choice. The more important part of this isn't the money itself. It's bringing it back to the front of their mind so that we're continuously reinforcing this concept. So call early and often, I would say. As I said when I was up there, go to the website, track the legislation. Certainly in the weeks around the hearing date for a particular piece of legislation is probably the most critical, but it doesn't hurt to start calling today. So I would say look at the website. It's House Bill 1726. Put a tracker on it. Get updates of when it's moving. Send testimony. Call. You know, I'm a big fan though of emailed testimony because they will save that with the bill, and as they're going through at the end of the session or whatever they're doing to see where's the support for this bill or that bill, they will have that physical record. I think I'm a chair, I use that. So I think that's critically important rather than just calling and say, hey, I don't live in your district, but I support this bill, thanks a lot. I would say, you know, give some good reasons why you support it. And I would say, do the same with the Speaker's office. Send emails, or you can just call the Speaker's office and say, please bring 1726 to the floor. This is really important. We need a lot of people to do that because the feeling in especially the House is there's no appetite for this. We have to prove that there is.
Hi, I'm Judith Ehrenstein from Acton, and I'm members of Mothers Out Front, and we're very new, and we've kind of dove in, and we're at the Board of Selectmen and whatever. And I was inspired with you saying that, you know, you've been on school committee, and also the work you're doing is really moving it on a district level, presenting it at the state, and hoping that other states are paying attention. So I'm sort of thinking of it on the local level. What can we do to put pressure either on the Board of Selectmen so that they can leverage the gas companies in particular so that they're not putting in new infrastructure without fixing the leaks. So I don't know much about politics, and I really want to know sort of if you've served in a local way, what you know that towns can do, sort of the structure of how that works, you know, changing laws and saying new infrastructure can't be built.
Well, certainly for the boards of selectmen and the planning board and the zoning board of appeals, making sure you have very strong bylaws in place in town with right-of-ways and that sort of thing. Towns, the boards of selectmen and town managers and planning directors will be notified very early if there is planning or surveying for new infrastructure in your town. So making sure that they are on top of that, looking at their rights as a town and how they can slow that down, or whether it makes sense bringing it to public. We were very, several years ago, when the new pipeline was first proposed and going through my district, we had a series of public events that were well attended. And we were able to make a very strong case that that pipeline was unnecessary and unwelcome. And so it forced the company to change their filing and move that pipeline out of the area and above the New Hampshire border. And then New Hampshire started saying, well, we don't want it either. So it really, at least for the time being, killed that project. So, you know, I think that public voices, when used together, can really make a difference. And you know, one of the things I think the select board can do is make sure the public is aware so that you can start organizing and advocating around that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
If I could just add, and obviously I come to most of these problems from a political point of view, but policymakers are politicians. I think it's important to not just advocate as a group, but to get involved politically. Nothing motivates a politician more than the prospect of winning an election. And nothing frightens politicians more than the prospect of losing an election. And I think Jen brought up a really good point, though. It's not just about instilling fear. It's about giving support to people who usually want to do the right thing. But the well-heeled or well-financed lobbyists just happen to have a bit more pressure than a lot of the people in this room do. And so don't just say, we want you to do this or we want you to do that. Say, and you know what? I'll be knocking on doors for you next October and November because we know that you're fighting for us. That is so important at the local level and the state level and the federal level. Every policymaker, whether they are an elected official or not, has to answer not to the public, although we don't like to think that, but to the voters, to the voters. And if you can provide support to policymakers in the political arena, that is extraordinarily valuable, even if it's a board of selectmen. Just say, thank you for letting us know about this. We are the 10 people from Mothers Out Front in your neighborhood, and we really care about this. But not just that. If you lead on this issue, we will be with you. We will be with you. That is so powerful. Because believe me, 10 people knocking on doors, like, is the biggest campaign a Harvard or an Acton has ever seen, ever. Like that is a huge difference maker, a huge difference maker. So be there not just when the issue is bubbling up, but at the next election too.
Hi, it's Kristen. I'm just letting everyone know that we really have to wrap it up. So no, I love, this is the best part. I mean, not the best part. Everything was great, but this is a really lovely part. So if we could just ask questions and quick answers, but we need to leave in 15 minutes.
Okay, rapid.
Okay, quick. Deborah Symes from Acton. Nathaniel, I have a quick one for you. In your effort to seduce people to become voters, do you also do a carrot on the other side if you learn that they have voted in 1 or 2 or 3 elections? Do you reward them in some way with attention?
Yes. So study after study has shown that peer pressure and social pressure are without a doubt the best way to get people to vote. But there's something called hard or negative social pressure, and then there's another thing called positive social pressure. Positive social pressure can be extraordinarily powerful. And what you do is, in the lead up to an election, you send a thank you letter. A thank you letter reminding people that you actually know that they voted. In fact, sometimes you include a copy of their voting history, and you thank them.
Great.
You say, thank you for being such a good voter. Here is a copy of all the times you were a good voter. We look forward to sending you a thank you letter next time as well.
Great, thank you. And Jen, a quick one for you, which is, so carbon pricing can happen sort of at the consumer level. It also can happen at the source level, at the, with the industries or the companies that do the extractive stuff. So can you just do a quick, like 5 sentences on which one this is? I think I know, and how you decided to go that way rather than the other. Thank you.
Consumer.
Thank you.
Yes. And really, the honest reason is because we don't have extraction happening in Massachusetts. Thank you. That's less than 5 sentences.
Hi, I'm Joris Wills. I'm one of the organizers of Indivisible Acton. We are, as we said, kind of a lobbying organization. Our biggest problem is we actually lack expertise as to what to lobby for. And there's so much stuff going on, trying to make a choice. We've thought, well, maybe we'll go reach out to our local 350.org group and have them pick what to do. But indeed, sort of as to spread it across the state, I have no idea how one could even have. If 350.org got its acts together all around the state, then potentially other groups will end up coming to the same conclusion. So it's more like, that's the struggle that we're dealing with. I don't even know how to formulate it to a question which you can answer in 60 seconds.
Well, that actually is part of what I was trying to address, is that I don't think we have to recreate the wheel. That 350.org and RWA, so work with, they are your advocates, so use them, strengthen them. How can we work with you? Yeah, I mean, I think Indivisible and Activist Alliance and groups that span, across issues have this question: how do we interact with the local activists, and are we different from them? No, you're working on the same things. You're really them. It's just that your on-ramp to the questions and the problems was in a different route, but now you're on the same march. And think of them as allies. I mean, that's really my answer to that. And you'll all be stronger.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Lupi. I'm the Regional Director for Clean Water Action. And I wanted to ask everyone here to join me in thanking the here but not here Jamie Eldridge and the very here Jen Benson in their amazing climate and clean energy leadership. If I could just have... this is maybe one of the most fortunate areas in the state in terms of like being home turf for actual heroes and sheroes in this movement. So we're really crazy fortunate to be here tonight with you. Two quick comments on questions that have been asked. One is part of why we need to be thanking Jen Benson is that she's modeling for public officials how to engage with communities of color and justice communities and labor communities around these very complex issues. Her bill was directly influenced by Arise for Social Justice, by the Green Justice Coalition, by groups led by communities of color and women of color. And so the portions of her bill that put aside funding for low-income energy efficiency, that comes from feedback from those communities. The portion of the bill that gives guarantees that low-income communities will get at least 30% of the funding set aside, that comes from these communities. So a huge thank you to you for teaching all of us, showing all of us how to build a movement that is more inclusive. So that's one thing. And this, yeah. The second thing is one of the bottom lines in any kind of campaign is that there's strength in numbers. That it's like, it's sort of the building block of what we all do. There are two coalitions that have organized support across the state for all the bills that have been talked about tonight. So a lot of the solar energy, the renewable energy bills are campaigning, that the campaigns behind them, a coalition of hundreds of groups called Mass Power Forward. So for the groups here who want information on how to get involved in those bills, this is bigger than any one organization. It's bigger than Clean Water. It's bigger than Mothers Out Front. It's bigger than 350 Mass. It's all of us working together. So take that down, Mass Power Forward, and go there and get involved. The second coalition that's specifically focusing on carbon pricing is the Mass Campaign for a Clean Energy Future. And that campaign will have all kinds of information on the carbon pricing fight. But we really are trying to be very inclusive and build a huge political force across the state that will propel, with Rep. Benson's leadership, these issues over the finish line this session. So two just points of information of how to get involved.
So I'm just going to quickly say it's almost saddens me that we have to applaud inclusivity in public policy because that should be the basis of all public policy. I think that's something that it is sort of a sad commentary of our current sort of political climate that so much policy and politics has been used to break people apart rather than bringing people together. So anyway, I just had to make that statement because it struck me as odd, right?
Hi, Jim Greer from Groton, another indivisible dweeb. And following the impassioned talk about inclusivity on your bill, I'm just thinking, since it's an uphill sell to get to carbon pricing in the first place, coming from a former recovering Republican situation for myself, it strikes me as being much better to pull in the marginal people by just doing the flat rebate like Senator Barrett's bill does, and then we'll work towards something else, but to get to that ratchet, if we can get to having pricing first, right. That just strikes like the proper way to reconcile your two bills.
Right, well, and we had a lot of those conversations, and the fact is that when it comes to the public and when it comes to even to legislators, the nuance between these two are really lost on the fact that they're going to call it a tax as a tax as a tax. And so that's the biggest argument against either of these bills and the whole concept. And the question to me is, I feel an urgency to get this done. And how are we going to maximize? If we're going to take the vote, let's maximize the benefits of it. And we have to drill down into communities and regions and municipalities where we have a lot of work to do. Because quite frankly, if you're upper middle class, upper class, whatever, you're already doing all the things that, or if you're inclined to do anything, you're already doing them around the environment. We have to get more tools to more people and start that movement in those communities. And so I said, if I'm going to file a bill, I want to go all the way. And you know, I'm really tired of being safe. And you know, Cindy was in the meeting where I said I would rather lose my election and lose my job than not do what I feel like is the right thing to do. So.
Thank you guys for being here. I just wanted to let everybody know that I just looked it up online. The lobby day is June 13th. Lobby day for the carbon pricing. But here's what I couldn't find online. We go to the State House. What group can we connect with for the lobby day? The Mass Power Forward?
It's actually the Campaign for a Clean Energy Future, but we can just talk.
Campaign for clean. Yeah, but everybody here needs to know, right?
Okay.
It needs to be clear, like, and then when is the hearing? Okay, so June 13th and June 20th. And it's and we talk for 3 minutes, because I've never done this before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I would also suggest, if you're going to testify, that's great. Bring written testimony and hand it in so that they can refer back to that.
And that's what the committees look at?
Yeah.
Okay. And what has DeLeo said about this?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Facebook event page for the lobby day that people can get to pretty easily.
I think I'm an epilogue. I'm Pamela Dritt, and I really think the things you're doing is important, but more and more I'm thinking that everything is economics. And this is a tax, and that's a very good thing, because it's the kind of tax that is an investment in the entire community and will benefit everybody much more than the cost of paying it. Plus, it reduces economic inequality because it's a transfer of wealth to the bottom where it's needed. Even if it didn't help the environment, it would be great tax reform.
Wow, I love you.
I just have one more thing. I don't know if the subtlety was lost on the audience, but the person who asked me in Harvard what were the green groups and who I worked with, that was Ellen Leisher, of course. I hope everybody understood that. And she just left the room to go be out there at the tables, but she is a lot of the reason why we're here as well. So thank Ellen.
I wanted to do a quick thank you to our sponsors, and if you're still here, it would be great to stand up. Obviously, the Environmental Voters Project, Green Acton, 350 MA Metro West, Clean Water Action, Nashua River Watershed, ActonTV, Sudbury Valley Trustees, Mothers Out Front, AB Resource Force Team, Waymark Management, Market Lifestyle of Health and Sustainability, so that's Market LOHAS, the UPS store in Acton, and Acton Conservation Trust.